Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. How are you doing? So, I see we got 61 people watching with only 34 likes. Make sure you hit the like button so we can increase that number. And let's get right into it. Algorithm, you know the whole speech. You know the whole speech. So, okay. So today was day 11 of the Julian Assange extradition hearing, 22nd of September 2020. We only had one expert witness testifying today. Okay, so this was Dr. Koppelman. He's an emeritus professor of neuropsychiatry at King's College in London, right? So let me show you his picture very quickly. There you go. That's him. Okay. And this guy, he's been giving psychiatric evaluations to Assange. So he's been visiting him a couple of times in Belmarsh prison, and he diagnosed him with a few things we'll get to in a second. And, you know, this is a very important date because the other testimonies that we've heard so far, they were regarding redaction of cables, U.S. law, U.S. Constitution, the Espionage Act, the history of journalism, etc., which are all important, obviously, but there's also a risk to Julian's health given the fact that he's been locked up in the Ecuadorian embassy for 7 years, right? Given the fact that he's in solitary in Belmarsh prison, given the fact that he's facing 175 years in the U.S. and in a supermax, no less, right? So in pre-trial, he'd be held in Alexandria detention, which is in Virginia, right? And then even in pretrial, he'd be in what they call administrative segregation, which is effectively solitary, and it's absolutely inhumane. And he'd most likely get convicted, right? Because the jury would be made up of people who work at the CIA, who work in the intelligence community, and then he'll go to ADX Florence, which is for the worst of the worst, and be placed under special administrative measures, which are really, I mean, absolutely inhumane. So we've already gone through all these things, but just to give you that context, again, why his health is important. And, you know, this confinement, this prolonged arbitrary detention that he's already been through, this past decade almost, right? That's already taken a huge toll on this man. And it's going to get even worse if he's kept any longer in Belmarsh or sent to the US, God forbid. So that's why it's important to hear this testimony from medical experts. And just to go through this with you, I'm going to try and break this down for you, not chronologically. If you'd like to read it in chronological order, how it unfolded, by all means, go see what Kevin Gostola was writing, what I was writing on Twitter. You know, we were live tweeting as it's unfolding, but I'm going to try and break this down for you logically of what happened in court. Okay, so the prosecution, man, they just don't quit. As usual, they tried to discredit the expert witness. Okay, so Lewis was back, right? Lewis QC, and he starts going after the expert witness. He starts going after Dr. Koppelman. And how does he do this? So he tried several tactics, right? The first one, he tried to quiz him. This guy is an expert in neuropsychiatry, and he's trying to quiz him like he's some schoolboy. And he even said, Dr. Koppelman even said, I didn't realize I was going to be taking O-level tests today. You know, O-levels is like, I don't think they even have O-levels anymore. It's like before A-levels. So anyway, he tried to, because, you know, they're talking about the DSM and the ICD codes. So let me show these to you. Some of you might be familiar with these terms, right? DSM, this is Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and you have corresponding ICD codes, right? So these are international codes for classification of diseases. So, I mean, this guy has served on committees for the ICD, he's not just any doctor, he's served on committees for this thing. So I think he's more than qualified to talk about this topic. And nonetheless, Lewis tries to quiz him, and he's like, close the book. Koppelman just flat out refuses. That was ridiculous. And that was the first, one of the first things he tried. And then another stupid moment, he told Lewis, right, the prosecution, he told Koppelman, well, technically, you're a neuropsychiatrist. You're not qualified to talk about forensics here, right? You're not a forensic psychiatrist. And then Koppelman is like, that's quite rich, considering that you acquired my services in another case as a forensic psychiatrist. Unbelievable. So, once again, they're trying to discredit the expertise of the witness and then also go after their integrity. So another thing that he tried with Koppelman, another thing that Lewis tried was, he said, in your first report on Assange's mental evaluation, you didn't mention his partner, Stella Morris, and his 2 kids. But you did in the second report. And Koppelman explained to him, yeah, well, at the time, the relationship was not public. You have to consider that Assange is literally wanted by the CIA. They spying on him in the embassy. They're trying to put him in jail for 2 centuries. So yeah, it's a bit of an issue disclosing those things. So obviously, of their own decision, they kept that out of the public eye. And out of respect, Koppelman, he did not disclose the relationship in the first report. It doesn't even really pertain that much to his mental well-being. I mean, it's the confinement, it's the persecution, it's the prolonged detention that's taking a toll on his mental health, on Assange's mental health. It's not strictly related to whether he has a partner and kids or not, right? Even though they tried to make it about that. But that was another way of trying to attack the integrity and credibility of the expert witness. So Lewis was essentially saying, oh, you're doing favors for the defense, and your obligation is to the court, first of all. But clearly you're biased because you were helping them hide the relationship, when he was actually just doing it out of respect. That's the only reason. So that was another thing. And then when it comes to what we've covered before is the report, the conclusion that the UN put out, right? The special rapporteur on torture. So he visited Assange in Belmarsh with 2 other physicians. And just to show you, here's the report. So you might recall this, right? And man, Lewis, he just starts going through it. Like he's essentially flat out said that, yeah, this entire report by the UN Special Rapporteur, by Meltzer, it's nonsense. And he said the fact that Koppelman referred to this report in his evaluation about Assange indicates that he's biased. Why? Because Lewis, the prosecution, were saying that this entire thing is a political document. Okay? And I mean, he kind of agreed with their assessment that it contained political language and such, but you gotta understand that it doesn't change what's happening to Assange. Okay, when he says here that it is obvious that Mr. Assange's health has been, remember, this is Meltzer, the rapporteur on torture. He's saying it was obvious that Mr. Assange's health has been seriously affected by the extremely hostile and arbitrary environment he has been exposed to for many years. Okay, he shows all symptoms typical for prolonged exposure to psychological torture, including extreme stress, chronic anxiety, intense psychological trauma. It doesn't change any of that. But he was saying, here it says that there's a group of democratic states ganging up to deliberately isolate him, that therefore this is entirely political. And so his point was that, well, you included part of this in your statement about Assange in your evaluation, so clearly you're biased. And Koppelman tells him, listen, I didn't include any of the political stuff in here. He just referenced what I read to you here, the first paragraph about the prolonged exposure to and psychological trauma and detention and all the effects that it's had on his health, right? So we're not talking about the political language in this document. And he made it clear that his evaluation regarding Julian Assange's mental health is not based entirely off of this document. He doesn't need this to make an assessment about his mental health, right? So without going into too much detail, because, out of respect for Assange, and actually the prosecution and the defense both decided at the end of today's hearing that they would not publicly disclose the full statement, witness statement rather the evaluation itself from Dr. Koppelman, just out of respect for Assange, because I mean, there's been an exhaustive hearing today. Okay, we got a full picture of what's going on. We don't need to actually publish the whole thing, but just briefly. And Julian Assange's mother has said this herself on Twitter, so I'm not trying to like push any. I'm not going past that. But Assange has anxiety, he has depression, and PTSD. He has post-traumatic stress disorder. Who wouldn't? With this persecution over the span of a decade, and you're looking down the barrel of 2 centuries in jail. Who the hell wouldn't, man? So that much is obvious, and that's what he diagnosed him with, right? And there was also so yeah, there you go. And that was the part about discrediting the expert witness. Now, what's also insane is that a lot of the questions that the prosecution was asking Dr. Koppelman was stuff, regarding Assange before he was even his doctor. I mean, you got to keep in mind, this evaluation, Koppelman's been evaluating Assange and has had him under his care, I mean, just since 2019, and they were still asking him things since before that. How is he supposed to know? He told them, I don't know. I can't speak to that because I wasn't evaluating him. I wasn't his physician. I wasn't his psychiatrist. So I can't speak to that. And we'll get back to that in a second. But, another big takeaway from today was that what the prosecution was trying to do, which is frankly obscene, they were trying to get the expert witness, Dr. Koppelman, to essentially change his diagnosis of Assange. Seriously. Yeah, they even said it at one point. He flat out told the expert witness, Lewis, the prosecution, he told Dr. Koppelman, I'm trying to get you to change your diagnosis. And Koppelman tells him, well, I'm a psychiatrist and you're a lawyer. So, which was actually a very lawyery response. But nonetheless, this is absurd. And the way they did this is they tried to undermine the diagnosis, the PTSD, the depressions and anxiety in Koppelman's evaluation with trivial issues. So, for example, Koppelman said that Assange, he has moderate to severe depression, and of course, you have to consider that it got worse under COVID. So he already had this depressive episode, a really bad one in 2015, 2016, but it got back to moderate when he was incarcerated in Belmarsh, and then when he had the COVID lockdown during the last 6 months, it got even worse. And so he started experiencing some auditory hallucinations, like hearing music, okay? And some medication helped with that, but what Lewis was trying to do, what the prosecution was trying to do, is say that, well, you can't be certain that he's having these hallucinations because Assange is the one who reported them. They're self-reported. And Koppelman's telling him, yeah, well, that's how most psychiatry works. It's self-reported information from the patient. You can't use an MRI scanner to detect hallucinations. I mean, is that not glaringly obvious? So that's one thing. And then they even, what the prosecution tried doing is going back, I'm not kidding, they went back to the 90s and they were saying like, oh, well, look, here's this diagnosis from a doctor in Australia. And at the time, in the 90s, he said that Assange had mild depression. Okay, that was the 90s. I don't know what your point is. Like what, someone had mild depression 25 years ago can't have moderate depression now when you're fucking persecuting him and threatening him with 2 centuries in jail? What? What does that even mean? This is the kind of crap that the prosecution is trying to spew. I'm not kidding. It gets worse. So that's one thing. And they were having an argument about the language regarding hallucinations. Because, if under the extradition treaty between the UK and the US, it's not just about a political trial, which we've already established it is a political trial, but also if the patient, or the person being detained, if the doctor can assert that the patient is also under, their well-being is threatened by this extradition and their mental health is not in a good state, you can also block the extradition on those grounds alone, based on medical grounds, okay? So it is important. I mean, and this is glaringly obvious what's happening to Assange. He didn't need to go to Belmarsh just to experience these symptoms. He was already having them being holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy, right? But nonetheless, so they were trying to go back all the way like 20, 30 years and dig through his record. I mean, it's just stupid. And another thing they tried doing as well, the prosecution is saying that, well, hold on a second. He's told you, Dr. Koppelman, he's told you about suicidal ideation. And according to reports from the court, right, from the, when he was on the way to court, rather, you know, they did some brief assessments and look, Assange said that he was feeling okay on this one random day over here. What does that mean? Koppelman told him, listen, just because he said once that he was feeling okay on the way to court doesn't mean that he doesn't have depression, essentially, right? I mean, it doesn't automatically cure someone from depression. And another thing is also this issue with the razor blade. So they were saying that because Assange volunteered the information that he had a razor blade hidden and that he had thought about suicide, therefore it's not true. Why? Because it's self-reported, because he volunteered the information to his psychiatrist, to Koppelman. And he didn't say this information to the prison shrink. And it's not in the report's psychiatric evaluations from the prison. And Koppelman tried to explain to them, yeah, well, he doesn't trust you. He was under fear that if he talks about how he's feeling, you might put him under suicide watch, you might put him under more restrictive detention. And moreover, he speaks more to me. I'm his psychiatrist. So, of course, he would confide more in me and tell me, reveal more information. I think that much is obvious. So that's another very important point. And nonetheless, they tried to use it against Assange, saying that, oh, he's just making this up. You know, way to insult people who are suffering from mental illness. Seriously. I mean, not just Assange, who's like sitting right there in the dock and hearing all of this, but just anyone who struggled with mental illness. Well done. You know, once again, they just like have zero compassion, zero empathy, just disgusting. So another thing the prosecution did is, God, this was so ridiculous. They said that, oh, Dr. Koppelman, you didn't tell us in your report that Assange happens to read the British Medical Journal. And this should have rang alarm bells. What? Basically, what they're trying to say is that because Assange reads the British Medical Journal, clearly he used this to make up his mental illness. What? Like, you don't think the fact that he's been holed up for almost a decade and that you're threatening him with 175 years in jail is causing him anxiety? You don't think that has anything to do with it? Oh, no, it's because he reads the British Medical Journal, clearly. And he's making all this. What kind of a fucked up logic is that? That's what they're trying to argue. Unbelievable. So Koppelman told them, listen, this is normal, okay, to be concerned with one's health, and Assange is a bit hypochondrial, and he was just reading up on his mental health. That's it. Like, they're reading too much into it, no pun intended. So they're trying to use like every goddamn scrap of evidence against both Assange and his psychiatrist. It's just insane. And they're also saying that, do you believe that Assange suffers from delusion and not hallucinations? They're trying to make this distinction, right? And they asked him, like, the prosecution asked him, because he has this fear of being recorded and overheard. And Koppelman told him, well, given the experiences that he's had in the Ecuadorian embassy, you know, with UC Global and the CIA spying on him, it's a rational anxiety response to fear that you're being recorded and overheard, which is the goddamn diametric opposite of delusion, because it's anchored in reality. He has been spied on. He knows it. It's a fact. It's not delusion. They're grasping at straws, man. It's the mental gymnastics at play. It's crazy. Oh, no pun intended with that either. So they're trying to use all of these like stupid things just to essentially get the doctor to change his diagnosis. And he told them, no, he's not doing that. And they also said that, well, look, Assange, he was playing pool sometimes. and he was he was consuming milk and oranges. Weight loss usually accompanies depression. How come there's no weight loss? He's eating healthy and all this stuff. And Cobbleman told him, no, this was to make sure there's no weight loss in the first place. And even more ridiculous, they're saying that, well, Assange was clearly able to function because he was running WikiLeaks. He was on RT with this talk show, and he was doing public speakings, and therefore he can't suffer from depression because maybe it's a mild depression, but he's able to function. And they were saying also that right now in the court, so not just a few years ago, but right now, he's following the proceedings, right? Sometimes he's yelling nonsense. or when he was defending Khaled al-Masri, right? Saying he won't accept for the statement of a torture victim to be censored. Or when they first asked him on the first day, like, do you accept to be extradited? And he said no. So the prosecution trying to argue, well, look, clearly his cognitive functions are working and he's able to follow the proceedings and he was doing all of these big things before. So maybe it was a mild depression, but it's not a severe or a moderate one. And, they're basically like, I can't make, like, I don't know what to say, man. Like, as if people don't have functioning depression, like they can't understand that there are people who suffer from these conditions, from anxiety, from PTSD, from depression, and are still able to carry out daily tasks. It doesn't mean that their suffering is diminished any less or made any easier. You lock in this guy up in solitary, he can't even get outside, he can't even get fresh air, he can't see his family, he can't do nothing. And with the lockdown on top of it, I mean, anyone, like even if you don't have depression, you might get depression just from that. Never mind if you already had it before. And now you're trying to tell a leading expert in neuropsychiatry that he doesn't know what he's talking about. So, man, after all this nonsense, he refused to change his diagnosis. Of course not. He's not going to change his diagnosis. And now here's another ploy that the prosecution tried. So once they established essentially that the doctor is the expert witness, he's not going to change his diagnosis. What they tried to do, which is very clever, but it didn't work, they tried to get him to change his outlook on Assange being extradited to the US, right? So they were saying things like, okay, well, you won't change your diagnosis, but we're going to show you these statements from AUSA Kronberg, the federal prosecutor, and you see he's given assurances in regards to suicide protocols and mental health care. Does that make you feel any easier about Assange being extradited to the US? Any safer, that he'll fare well over there? He said no, because he's already heard these kinds of assurances before. When it comes to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York, with Jeffrey Epstein, for example, he also heard assurances that that jail was safe, and then Epstein winds up dead. And also in the case of Chelsea Manning, I mean, she tried to commit suicide in Alexandria, which is, again, where Assange would also be going for pretrial. And Assange knows this. So what does that say about this facility where it's so bad and the conditions are so horrible that it drives someone to suicide, and that they're actually able to maybe go through with it and succeed? So the doctor, the expert witness, Dr. Koppelman, was not convinced at all by these assurances from the U.S. prosecution, okay? And he made it very clear that if Assange goes to the U.S., that's going to trigger a suicide attempt. He made it extremely clear. It's going to trigger a suicide attempt, and that he will find a way. And he also raised the point before that Assange has already made preparations. He's written up a will. He talked with a priest and done these kind of farewells. So, I mean, he's going to be on the other side of an ocean. He can't see his kids, his partner, his parents. And you got to remember that also under special administrative measures, they record your conversations with your legal counsel, with anyone who visits you. They control who can visit you. You're in solitary. I mean, it's draconian beyond belief. So Assange knows this. The psychiatrist knows this. And he actually Dr. Koppelman, he actually helped block an extradition from the UK to the US in another case, right? Based on these inhumane conditions. And he also made the point that, let me show you this over here. So he cited a couple of reports that back up his verdict that conditions in the US are inhumane. Not just, I mean, obviously for people placed under SAMs, under special administrative measures and in solitary, but even in general. And we heard this last week, that prisoners all over are neglected. So you look over here, he cited the Center for Constitutional Rights, he cited the Marshall Project, and he cited also Maureen Baird. I don't know if I'm saying her name correctly, but she used to work for the Bureau of Prisons, and she herself testified in the UK of that the conditions are atrocious, right? Eric Lewis, we heard from him last week. So, I mean, this is not just Dr. Koppelman saying this. We have extensive research and organizations dedicated to substantiating this claim and proving and showing the inhumane conditions that prisoners are subjected to, right? So, as you can see, this was very, very important day. I mean, I can't imagine how Julian feels having to listen to all that every day, but especially today was very personal. Medical history, all of these things, and for his family as well. But nonetheless, it's really important that Dr. Koppelman said in as clear terms as possible, if Julian Assange is extradited to the US, it will trigger a suicide attempt. And he is at grave risk of taking his own life. Who could blame him, honestly? Who could blame him after what he's already been through and what he's facing? But moreover, he also made the point that even if he's not extradited, and by the way, the prosecution, they didn't just ask what the expert witness thinks about Kronberg's reassurances, but also would you feel any easier about Assange's extradition if he only serves 5 years, for example? And again, as I said before, he mentioned all these things. He can't see his family. The conditions are too harsh. He's going to be in solitary. So it makes no difference if it's 5 years or 175 years. I mean, it's all terrible. And we know already from the other extra witnesses that it's not going to be anything less than a life sentence, even if you convict him on 1 or 2 counts. And that's why they expanded this into 18 counts, so they can make sure they get at least 1 or 2. That's effectively a life sentence at 49. Okay? That's effectively a life sentence. Not to mention if you're in, even if you're in good health already, not to mention if your health has already been declining physically and mentally because of this prolonged confinement and persecution. I mean, God, what is there to debate here? What is there to debate? You don't need to be a shrink to figure that one out. You really don't. So he said that even if Assange stays in the UK, in Belmarsh, he's still at risk. That's how grave this issue is, right? And looking back at the last decade, how much this has taken a toll on him, physically, mentally, emotionally, right? So the risk is there, and it's just going to get even worse if he's taken to the US. That is the main point from today's hearing. And just to conclude, I want to play you a short clip from John Shipton, who is Assange's father, and I really love what he said. So he was speaking outside the Old Bailey. Let me just play this to you, right?
Thanks for coming. Today was the medical evidence. It was pretty torrid in there. The psychiatrist was examined for 4.5 hours, which was I wouldn't like to have to do it. But overall, the view is that we clearly are winning in this battle against the United States, and continuing that sort of appearance, everything seems to me to be a distraction. So we have the Brown University's study, longitudinal study, that there are 38 million displaced persons from the 20 years of war. Craig Murray estimates that the dead would be around 4 million people in the last 20 years. These souls that cry for justice, this is a distraction, great suffering for Julian, but a distraction for us from insisting that these war criminals be brought to justice. That's the sole thing that we must solve after we get Julian free, that these criminals that murder families, mothers, children, fathers, grandfathers, be brought to justice and stop destroying country after country after country. 7 countries in the last 20 years. Thank you.
John, can I ask you one question, please?
Yeah.
Wow. That was really powerful. That's really powerful. I mean, you can tell you can tell where Julian gets it from. Yeah. How he feels so much empathy with other people. So that's about it. That's day 11. That's what happened. And tomorrow we'll hear more expert testimony regarding Julian's health and how this extradition, how all of the detention up until now, all the prior confinement to the embassy and in Belmarsh has had such an adverse effect on his well-being. So we'll hear more about that. And yeah, that's about it. I just wanted to bring you up to speed. Thank you for tuning in and watching and sharing the videos and spreading the word. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your support. So I'll take any questions you have, and just friendly reminder, if you'd like to support independent media, please go ahead. Just scan one of the QR codes with your phone. And other than that, besides Venmo, CashApp, PayPal, there's also the Patreon. Any support is really appreciated. So thank you guys very much for helping support independent media. Really, really means a lot. So I'll just be looking at your questions. Give me a second. And I'm going to post the link to the newsletter in the live chat in the comments. Okay, so definitely join the newsletter because we don't want to centralize everything on YouTube. You know what I'm saying? Especially what big tech are doing. I mean, not a good idea. Not a good idea. So definitely sign up for the newsletter. That's the backup. And Rockfin as well. Rockfin is like YouTube, but better. No censorship. So we're live on Rockfin right now too. Let me read your questions. Thank you very much for the super chats. We got one from Skeptical Mantis. Good to see you. It says, Richie, please interview Daruba bin Wahad. He is a Black Panther and a Black Liberation Army member. He has a lot of powerful ideas about revolution. I would love to. Thank you. I always tell you guys to give me suggestions for who to bring on the show. So I really appreciate that. By the way, speaking of which, I will be on Hardlens Media tomorrow, right? So 5 p.m. Chicago time. And I'm scheduled on Friday to be on another show, which I'll also let you know about, okay? You know, we're going live every day for the coverage on this extradition hearing. So I'll let you know what time the Friday one is. But tomorrow I'll be on Hardlens Media, just so you know. So thank you for that, Skeptical Mantis. Thank you also to Redneconomics for the donation. Says, thanks for covering this and other important topics. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I mean, you know, whether mainstream media were covering this or not, we would be covering it. It's not about like trying to do it because they won't do it. No, it's not. We're not trying to pick up their slack. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do. So I appreciate these kinds of comments. I really do. And Rob, thank you also for the donation. Thank you for the super chat. You guys are the best. I'm just making sure I didn't miss anybody over here. All right. We got one from Mona. Mona Don, thank you very much. Mona says, no question, Richie, in quotation marks. Just wanted to say you're doing an amazing job. We appreciate all your hard work. Also, I signed up for the newsletter a while ago and never get any emails. I haven't used it yet. That's why. And also, I've given you suggestions and you ignore them. Hey, we out here hustling. I still love you anyway. Thank you, Mona. You're too sweet. The newsletter, I tell people to sign up just so that, well, the initial idea was we could use it as a substitute for YouTube's notification system, which doesn't work half of the time, right? I'm glad some of you got this one. We got 145 people watching, which is amazing. But I was thinking of using that to substitute it. And, you know, hopefully we won't actually have to resort to that. You know, we're going to try and stay on YouTube as long as we can. But definitely sign up for the newsletter. You know, we can't centralize everything on these big tech companies. And besides YouTube, as I mentioned, there's also Rockfin. So you're going to find Jimmy Dore on Rockfin. You're going to find Hardlands Media. You're going to find Status Quo, Ron Placone. So tons of lefties there, right? Nico, Combo Couch, Graham Elwood. Definitely go and sign up. Rockfin.com/RichardMedhurst. So we're not just on YouTube. And thank you all for the support. I really appreciate it. So I'm gonna leave this as it is, and I think we covered the essentials. Oh, there's another point also in the proceedings today where Lewis, so the prosecution, Lewis, he told Dr. Koppelman that, yeah, okay, so he was saying that Assange is malingering, right? That, you know, he's pretending to be sick. And when the prosecution weren't arguing that he's pretending to be sick, they're trying to argue what kind of depression he has. Like, oh, it's not a severe depression. No, it's a mild depression. Oh, no, it's not hallucinations. It's delusion. And oh, no, it's not those kinds of hallucinations. I mean, it's insane. So anyway, at one point, Dr. Koppelman tells them that, listen, Assange has already passed 2 tests to establish this malingering issue that you keep raising. And then the prosecution says, no, those were not tests that can ascertain that. And Koppelman loses it. He's like, listen, I'm the neuropsychiatrist. The word malingering is in the name of the goddamn test. I think I know what I'm talking about. So that was honestly hilarious. I pulled up a screenshot of it, actually. I posted it here. Hold on. This is it. You see that? The test of memory malingering. It's in the name. So shortly thereafter, Lewis decided to move on with his questioning. But yeah, that was just ridiculous. Like the guy trying to pretend he knows psychiatry better than the neuropsychiatrist. Come on, get out of here. That's ridiculous. So that's about it. I think we covered everything. So once again, I thank you guys very much for tuning in. Thank you so much for sharing the videos, liking, commenting, everything, all kinds of interactions that help with the algorithm. It's really appreciated. Thank you so much. And if you enjoyed the coverage, please subscribe. Please join the Patreon. Donate if you can. And it goes a long way to helping independent media. All right. So with that said, I bid you farewell, good night, good evening, wherever you are. And we'll see you tomorrow. Okay? Take care. Bye-bye.